Hi, I'm Herbet. I'm a Melbourne-based cinematographer and Final Cut Pro trainer. And in this video, I'd like to take you through some functions in Final Cut Pro which I think are specifically useful for cinematographers. The way that I've approached this is looking at it as though most of the times when cinematographers are going to be using an NLE, they're either going to be putting together their showreel or they might be having just to put together their footage and send it to a producer or an editor as easily and simply as possible. So those are the two sort of ways that I'm approaching this. One thing I will say before we get stuck in really is keep in mind I am using one of the new fancy M1 chip 13-inch MacBook Pros from Apple. But having said that, Final Cut Pro will run really quickly on just about any machine that you can get in the last 5 years or so from Apple. So even though it's really fast on the M1, it's still going to run really well on just about any machine you use these days. So let's jump in and have a play. Just before we go straight into Final Cut, I want to just take you quickly through media management that I use just in the Finder on my computer. Now, you probably do the same thing as I do, but I just want to show you what I do just in case you don't. Most of the stuff that I do is corporate work, so it's testimonials, documentary style stuff. So for example, here's a one-day shoot. If this was a multiple-day shoot, you'd have a folder called day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, so on and so forth. Then I've got my BTS broken up into what cameras I was using, and then I've got interview, tight, wide, interview 2, tight, wide, so on and so forth. Now it's very important from a Final Cut point of view to create these folders, because when you import your footage into Final Cut, you can tell Final Cut to create keywords from the folder names that you've saved your files in. So this is why having those folders set up originally is going to make your life a lot easier when you bring it into Final Cut. The first thing I want to take you through with Final Cut is just giving you an overview of the user interface. So over here on the top left hand side, this is called your sidebar, and this is where you organize your files and your footage and your keywords and so on. Over to the right of it is called your browser, and this is where you actually see the files and information about them. Then over on the top right hand side, this is your viewer. This is where you're going to view your footage, and also you can bring up, I'm going to hit Command 4, and that brings up your inspector where you do effects and things like that. Command 4 to get rid of it again. And if you don't want to use Command 4, you can always use the button up here in the top right hand corner. That's your inspector viewer. And something I will mention, something I really like to say about computers, is your mouse is your manual. And what I mean by that is if you want to know what any button in just about any application does, if you just hover your mouse over the button and leave your mouse there, it'll actually come up with a little tooltip that shows you what that button does. And down here at the bottom, this is your Final Cut calls it project, but most of us would call it a timeline. This is where you actually compose and put everything together for you. This is where the magic happens. This is where you do the editing. So let's go ahead and bring my footage in. So I can come over to the top left hand corner, and this little down arrow, there's our import button. So if I click on that, it's not done anything. And that's because before I click import, I've got to create a library to import my stuff into. So I'm going to come up to my menu bar, click on File, New, and say New Library. We'll call this ACS Demo. And I'm just going to save it in my movies folder on my local hard drive. But you can save this on an external hard drive, as you wish. One thing that you can't save it on is to an iCloud drive or to a remote internet drive. The reason for that being quite obvious is that if your internet flakes out while you're working on a project, that could cause some file damage and so on, because you could be halfway through something and that could cause issues. So you have to save it either on a local hard drive or a hard drive that's physically plugged in to your computer. It could be a network drive, but an internet drive like a Dropbox or iCloud, even if it lets you do it, I recommend you don't. So now you can see I've got a library, and the way that Final Cut sets up its structure for getting through your files is you've got your library as sort of like your parent thing. Everything's in your library, and within your library you can have events, and those are like folders within the main library. And you see that it puts the date in there, and I'll just rename that and I'll call that ACS Demo Event. So now I'm able to import my footage, and I'm just going to click either on the little arrow in the top left hand corner, or I can click on this big down arrow that says Import Media. Click on that, and then it opens up sort of like a browser, and it shows me that I've already looking at my external hard drive, and I can just click on the folder that I want to bring in, and even within this I can select some footage, and I can do basic in and out point selections, and not bring in everything, but just bring in the bits of the footage that I want. But I want to bring everything in, so I'm just going to select the main folder and bring it all in. Now over on the right hand side, I want to show you some really cool things over here. To begin with, it asks me if I want to put it in the existing event that I've got in my project or create a new event. And the most important one for our purpose here is to look at copy to library or leave files in place. If I selected copy to library, Final Cut is then going to take all of the footage that I'm importing and copy all of the footage into the library file that I've created. If I select leave files in place, Final Cut is not going to touch the original files at all. It's just going to create links to those files, and that saves me a ton of space. So if I don't have enough space to keep my library, which is going to be effectively another copy of everything, I don't copy it into my library. I leave the files in place, and then I can do whatever I like with them. But keep in mind, the most important thing to remember here is even if you choose leave files in place, Final Cut is never going to do anything to those actual files. So your files are completely safe. Final Cut is just referencing back to them. And then you'll remember that I said that it was important to create those folders when you're organizing your footage before you bring it into Final Cut. And that's where this comes in, where I can say create keywords from folders. So all the folder names that I've created within this folder will come into Final Cut as keywords. You can then have Final Cut balance your footage, find people in your footage, create optimize, create proximity, and we're going to discuss that in a little bit more detail later. But in the meantime, I don't want Final Cut to do anything to my footage. I just want Final Cut to link to it, and that's all I need. And I'm going to click import selected, and Final Cut goes and just validates that everything's good to bring in. There are some XML files in there that Final Cut will say, here we go, it'll say that it can't bring in those XML files because they're just XML files, and I'll go, yep, that's fine, I don't care about that, and it's processing those files and in they come. So keep in mind, Final Cut's not importing, it's not moving anything. All Final Cut is doing is it's referencing all of the media that I've got inside this for showreel folder. And there we go, the footage is all in here. And I'm just going to readjust the size of this. I'm going to pull this down. So if you want to readjust any of these windows, just move your mouse to the center and you get this little tooltip with the arrows on either side showing you which direction you can go in. And I want to close the inspector window because I want to have a little bit more space to work with it. So I'm going to come up to the button on the top right hand side and click to open it up. And there we go, there is all of my footage that I can start looking at, and this is all the stuff that I've selected to use in this showreel. And oh, you know what, this is a bit of a pain because you can see it's brought in a whole bunch of photos that I took from my BTS stuff, but I don't want to use these photos in my showreel, I just want the videos. So this is where it's actually really useful to use the data management functions inside of Final Cut. So I come into the search function here, and click on the search button. And here it's going to filter my footage. And I don't care about the text, but I want to add another filter criteria, and I can say by media type, and I can say is video with photo, but I think there's some video in there with, sorry, video with audio, and I think there's some video in there without audio that I do want to keep. So I'm going to go is not, and I'll say stills, and so now Final Cut will show me every single bit of media that is not a still image. And I want to save this as a smart folder so that if I bring more footage in or take footage out, this criteria will remain in terms of what it's showing me. So I say create new smart folder, and I'll call this no pics over here on the side. And so now whenever I click on this, this is a smart folder that will show me all of the media in my library that is not a still image. And that's probably where I want to work. And as you can see, Final Cut's actually expanded my event, and how it's done that, it's clicked on this little disclosure triangle in the sidebar, and that shows me all of the keywords that have been created from the folders that I had in my folder structure. So I had a folder called wide, and that's the wide shot. I had a folder called short walk, and this is footage from a short walk. I've got kung fu, and this is from a kung fu shoot that we did. I've got interview, and there's footage from the interview, so on and so forth. One of the things that Final Cut is really good at is working with multiple formats. So I've got footage from A7S's, A7S Mark II, I've got FS5, FS7, GH4, GoPros, I've got Canon C5, I've got Canon 5Ds, I've got Canon 60Ds, I've got Nikon footage, I've got different frame rates, I've got different resolutions. It's a mess. And Final Cut doesn't care, because Final Cut will work with pretty much anything you throw at it. And this is where, particularly for a showreel, I think this is a really useful function of Final Cut, because no matter what you've shot on, you can just chuck it into your timeline and get going. So first of all, I'm going to just restructure my browser to work the way I like to view it. So to restructure what's in these folders here, or in these columns, I'm just going to right click on the top of it, and I'm just going to untick the ones that I don't want to have in here. And this is the one place that I do have a little bit of a gripe with Final Cut. Something that I've been emailing them for months and months about is, for some reason, when you make these changes and you close Final Cut, when you open Final Cut up again, it doesn't keep the columns that you've set up. It puts them all back to the default one, which is just a little annoying, which is, again, not a big deal, but I just wish they'd fix that. So if you're listening, Final Cut team, please fix that. So let me just bring in frame size, video, frame rate, and codec. There we go. And so you can see there we've got some 4K 2997, we've got UHD, well there's DCI, there's UHD at 50 frames per second, we've got 2K at 240 frames per second, we've got 8K at 60 frames per second, we've got ProRes RAW, we've got AVI, we've got EVAC, we've got a whole host of different frame rates, resolutions, all that kind of jazz, and Final Cut is going to work just fine with all of it. And the reason for that is this. A lot of people, when they're working with footage, before they even work with any of their footage, they will transcode everything into ProRes. And that's not at all necessary when you're working in Final Cut. Let me explain why. So I'm going to click on Create New Project down here in the bottom of my screen. I could also click on File, New, say New Project, or Command N, which is the keyboard shortcut for this. And when I say, right, I want to create a new project, it'll give me a couple of options with this, and I'll call this ACS Showreel Demo. And you can see here that this is going to be a 4K project. I'd actually rather that this just be a 1080p project. And there we go, it's 1080, 25 frames per second. I could set it to whatever I like. And by default, the rendering codec for this project is going to be ProRes 422. The color space is Rec 709. You can change that to Rec 2020 if you're in a wide gamma project, but that's an entirely different video and conversation. And my audio is going to be stereo, 48 Hertz. But that ProRes 422 is very important, because when I click OK and now start working with this, any footage that I pull down into my timeline and start working in my timeline here, Final Cut in the background will create a ProRes 422 version of the section of the footage that I've put down into my timeline. So for example, here is some AV series. Here's some footage that I shot with the Moment app on my iPhone, and I'm just going to take that and dump that into my timeline. So just drag and drop. And there we go, it's in my timeline and I can work with it right away. Now you'll notice that there's a little bar of dotted lines across, and that means that this hasn't been rendered yet. And I've got background rendering turned on. So when I stop moving my mouse, you'll see in the top here, this little circle starts spinning, and it's spun so fast you couldn't even really see it. And that's now rendered. So that's now created a ProRes 422 version of this clip in my timeline. So the really cool thing with Final Cut is you never have to render any footage before you bring it into Final Cut. And you don't have to worry about rendering and creating ProRes or whatever versions, because Final Cut will just do that in the background as you work with this. So you don't have to worry about doing it. It just happens magically in the background, which is a really cool feature, or at least I think it is. Now let's have a quick look at some just basic edits in Final Cut. So to bring footage into Final Cut, as you saw, I could just drag and drop the footage. I'd like to show you some more precise ways of editing this. So as you can see, I'm skimming along this footage, and I can use the J, K, and L keys to skim backwards, forwards, or to stop. So if you use L to play forwards, you use K to stop, and you can use J to play backwards, and every time you click it, it goes double speed. So if I want to play this back at 3 times speed, I just push L 3 times, 1, 2, 3, K to stop, very simple. And so let's say I want to start this clip at about here, so I'm just going to push I to set an in point. You can see that represented by the yellow section coming up to that point. And then I push a little bit more forward, push O for out. And now if I drag this clip down, it will only drag down the area of the clip that I've highlighted with my in and my out points. So I can just drag it in, or I can push the E key to append that to my footage. You can see it's stuck it in there. Another way to do that is to use these buttons down here in your menu bar in the center. And so you can see here that if I move my mouse over it, it says append the clip. So this puts it at the end of your storyline. If I wanted this clip to be inserted in between two clips, I could use this button or the W key. So if I just put my playhead over here and then just push W, it cuts that clip in half and inserts that clip into there. And if I wanted to attach a clip, which is this button here, I can use the Q key to just attach it to my basically B-roll. So that's the basics of getting stuff into the timeline. But while we're in this area here and we're talking about in and out points, I want to show you how keywords work, because keywords are a phenomenally powerful tool within Final Cut, particularly for working on something like Showreels, where you might have a few thousand. For example, I've got 1,590 clips from various different projects over a course of multiple years. So let me show you how you apply keywords to a clip. Just go ahead and find something semi-interesting to get some footage of. So here we've got some elephants, and I'm going to put an in point here, and I'm going to move my mouse, or I could use the J, K, and L keys to get to where I want my out point and put an out point there. And now to apply a keyword, I either come up to the key button in the top left-hand corner, or I can push Command K to bring up my keyword edit, and I'll just move that over to the side so you can see it better. And you can see that there are no keywords applied to this clip at the moment. So to apply a keyword, I just need to type one. So I can go I should have found something that's easier for me to spell. Elephants walking away. Click return, and that's now applied that keyword to that clip. But now I want to apply a keyword to a different section of this clip. So now I can say, right, well, let's go and select this area of the clip here. So we'll put an in, we'll put an out, and we can go elephants in profile. Elephants, and we don't want elephants away, we go elephants in profile. And there we go, it's applied that keyword to that section of the clip. So it's really cool how you can apply different keywords to different sections of the clip. But you can apply keywords to the same or even half of a section of the clip, because this is just metadata. So I can go to halfway through that clip, set an out point halfway through, set an in point, let's say just a little bit before that initial keyword section started, and now I can say elephants walking away in profile. So you can add multiple keywords to multiple sections of, basically you can do keywords to everything and anything, however you like. And now when we use the disclosure triangle to reveal all the keywords in our events, you can see there's our keywords applied, elephants in profile, elephants, easy as that. And to remove a profile, again, you just select the clip. Sorry, to remove a keyword, you just select the clip, and you can actually see underneath it all the keywords that have been applied. You can just delete them like that, just select it and click delete. So keywords are phenomenally powerful. It does, I will admit, take a little bit of work to go through all your footage when you first bring it in and apply keywords, but once those keywords are applied, it makes your life so much easier. Let me give you an example. So let's say now I want to start putting this show reel together. So I think what would be good is to get some footage from the Galapagos Islands. So here's some Galapagos stuff, and yeah, let's just get this bit here. So we'll go in, we'll go out, we push E to append it to my timeline, then we go and find some footage from walk. Yeah, we go in, we go out. Now this is a very sort of, we go, yep, into the timeline. Now that's very specific, this is just in the Galapagos, but I want a little bit more specific. So I know that I took some stuff, so here's some short walk footage from the Galapagos Islands, and we'll go in and out, and we'll just go E and bring that into our timeline. And now let's go and get some footage from Luna Park. So I like that Luna Park. Yep. Now, one thing you'll notice that as I'm skimming through here, it is skimming my audio as well, and the kids shouting is quite loud on me. So I'm just going to put an out point there, and I'm going to come down to the sort of center right-hand side of my screen, and you can see that this is turn video and audio skimming on and off, or you can turn audio skimming on its own off. So I'm just going to turn off audio skimming, and now when I skim through my footage, it doesn't play the audio. It's just, for my old grumpy ears, makes life a lot easier. And let's go and grab another shot from Luna Park. Yep, we like that. And out, and E, just put it out. So you can see very quickly how easy it is to just go ahead and just throw things in and out. So you see there why keywords are so powerful, because when you're then working on a project and you go, oh, you know what, I really need a shot of, a shot from Fiji. Oh, you know what, I really need a shot of elephants in profile, or I really need a shot of elephants walking away, or I really need a shot of bathhouses. So it's very easy, as long as you've done the work in the beginning, to set up all those keywords to find specific shots that you need to find, so it doesn't stop you. I don't know about you, but I know for myself, when I'm working on a showreel or something that's got a ton of footage, I'll be going, oh, you know what, I really need that shot from the bathhouses, and I then spend half an hour searching through my footage for the right shot, whereas if I've keyworded it, it's much quicker for me to find it, and I can keep going with the creative flow of putting things together. Now let me show you a really cool function that's sort of exclusive to Final Cut Pro called the magnetic timeline. So I want to see everything within my timeline, so I can just use my trackpad to pinch in or pinch out to zoom in and out, or I can use the keyboard shortcut Shift-Z. So I've got my basic clips here on my timeline like I normally do. And you'll notice, if I just zoom out a little bit, that there's a difference in color on my timelines. These light gray and the dark gray line. This dark gray line is my primary storyline, and it behaves slightly differently to my secondary storylines, which is anything outside of that gray area. So you'll notice if I pick up this B-roll clip and move it around, it just moves around on its own. But if I pick up a shot in my magnetic timeline, in the primary storyline, and I move it around, the other clips will move around it to adjust. So this is how the magnetic timeline works. A really cool feature of that is if I've decided this B-roll fits well with this shot, I can just pick that shot up and the B-roll moves with it and remains connected to it. And you can tell it's connected because it's got this tiny little blue line connecting the two. So you can see there that those shots are connected together and they will move around. Now I don't have to leave this shot connected to it, because you'll see that when I move it away from this clip and onto this clip, the connection point moves with it, and now this clip is connected to that clip, and when I move that clip, the connected clip moves along with it. And that's the very basics of how the magnetic timeline works. Now you'll notice there's already a little bit of an issue, because if you have a look here, there's a little bit of the clip beneath this coming through, because this was shot at DCI 4K and this is UHD 4K. So you could manually resize it, but there's a really quick and easy way to fix that in Final Cut Pro within the inspector. So I'm just going to click Command 4 to bring up my inspector. And if I select the clip here, you can see at the bottom of the clip here, it says Spatial Conform. And if I click on Show, at the moment it's saying Fit, but I can say, no, I want you to fill, and it does crop in a little bit, but it automatically fills it. So that makes life a lot easier if you are getting any issues with very different resolutions in a single timeline. So that's nice and easy. And again, this is just all, you know, smooth as butter. Now, I want to have a look at how you would bring music into this if this was a showreel clip that you were making. So if you come up to the top left-hand corner of your screen and click on the little media button here, which is show or hide photos and audio slider, and I'm just going to click on, oh, I would like to access my photos. Yes, you may access my photos. And I'm going to click on music, and this will look in your music or iTunes library, or you can look at a folder or whatever. And here's a whole bunch of music that I've got that's copyright free that I can use, and let's go and find one that we like. Yeah, that one seems fine. And I'm just going to go ahead and drag that down into my timeline and add that to my timeline, and you can see there that it's attached itself to the first clip. Now that could be a problem if I'm going to be using the magnetic timeline, because let's say I decide I want to move this clip further down the track. Well, let's move the music with it. So how can I avoid that issue happening with the magnetic timeline? Really easy. There's a couple of different ways you can do it. Number one, you could put a gap clip in the beginning. So the way that you get a gap clip in there is you put your playhead at wherever you want your gap clip to be. In this case, I've put it at the beginning of my timeline, and I'm going to push Option W, and that adds a gap clip. And then if I attach the music clip to that, I can move all my video clips around, do whatever I like, and it leaves the music exactly where it is. Now that might work because you can then replace that gap clip with a video clip to replace it. So that's one way to do it. Another way you can do it is if you know that one video clip is definitely going to stay where it's going to stay, you can move the connection point of where that clip is connected to. So at the moment you can see here that this music is connected to this video clip. But if I want to connect it to this video clip, I just click on the video clip, then hold down Option and Command, and then click on the audio clip, and it's moved the connection point. So that's really an easy way to connect clips to different clips as opposed to the one that they were initially connected to. So that's nice and easy. Now another thing that you might want to do, and I'm actually going to put that connection clip back to be connected to that gap clip. Another thing that you can do when you're cutting the music generally is you want to cut to the beat. So the easiest way that I found to do this is just to add markers to your music. So I'm just going to highlight all this video and solo it out. So I'm going to basically mute it so it doesn't distract me when I'm listening to the music. So I select it all by just dragging my mouse over it and then just clicking on the V key. And you can see sort of grayed out, so it's going to be muted. And now I'm going to select my music clip, and as there is a beat, or on the, you know, the 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4, I'm going to put a marker. I will mention that I am not particularly musically gifted here, so I will get it on a beat. I won't necessarily get it on the beat, but let's see how we go. So I'm going to push the spacebar to play, and then just push M to put a marker on whenever I've got a beat. So let's go. You get the basic idea, and you can see I wasn't perfect. But now let me show you how easy it is to use the magnetic timeline and use the really cool functions in Final Cut Pro to get your clips to match so you've got your cuts on the beat. So let me go ahead and, oops, let me just undo that. So let me go ahead and unmute all of those. I'm just going to resize it. Oh, that's way too much. So let me just drag that music down and hit Command and hit Shift Z to resize it. And so now I'm missing a beat here. So all I do is I click on the T key to bring up my trim tool, or I can come up to my tooltips here and select the trim tool, and then move. When you notice that when I move my mouse over the cut point, it shows me a trim tool. I can then just move that cut point to where the beat is, and move that there, move that there. Gonna pull that in so it's actually, yep, and then we'll move that. Now you'll notice that on the right hand side it's showing me red, which means I don't have any handles, I don't have any more footage, so I can't move it to the left because there's nothing to move. So I'll move that over there, and let me just get rid of this connected clip, and then I'll readjust that so that's on the beat, and now I should have cuts on the beat. And you get the basic idea. So that's a really easy way to get your music organized around your clips and then reorganize your clips just slightly to get them ready for a showreel type cut. Now, there is an issue that you may have noticed already, is that, yeah, I've moved the edit point, but then also I've moved the bits of the clips that I want to visualize because, you know, I wanted to see earlier or later on this clip. well, you can still use the trim tool to adjust that as well. So I want to keep this clip at the same length. I don't want to make it longer, I don't want to make it shorter, but I want to see a different part of that clip. So I'm going to push T again to bring up my trim tool, and then instead of hovering my mouse over the edit point, I hover my mouse over the actual clip. And then when I click and drag, it adjusts the in and the out points of that clip while keeping the length exactly the same. So I can say, and you can see in my viewer that it's showing me on the left the beginning of the clip and on the right the end of the clip. So I want the clip to actually start, no, I actually want it to end as my face comes into that shot. So about there. So now, and there we go. Nice and easy. Pretty cool, yeah? So that's the basics of putting together your basic sort of showreel type clip, adding some music in there, adding some markers so you can get your cuts on the beat, readjusting where those edit points are. Next, I want to take you through a couple of the color grading features in Final Cut Pro. Now, I'm going to show you this by using the multicam view in Final Cut. I don't want to go too deep into the multicam element of it because I don't think that's really necessary for the context of this conversation. This is not really the perfect place to show you some sort of color grading options in Final Cut, and I don't want to get too deep into that because that again is a whole nother topic. But I just want to touch on some of the things that you have within Final Cut to do some color grading, and I'm going to use this example of trying to get these two shots to match a little bit better because you can see the exposure wasn't quite exactly the same on both of them. So to begin with, I'm actually going to change my user interface to give me an interface more optimized for editing color. So I'm going to come up to my menu bar at the top, click on Window, come up to Workspaces, and here's a pre-built one that Apple gives you called Color and Effects. And that's already brought up some scopes for me. It's brought up my effects. I don't really need my effects. I'm going to just hide them by clicking on the effects button in the center right of my screen there. And I'm just going to extend that screen there. I'm going to make my scopes a little bit smaller, and I don't need a 4 scope up. I only need 2 scopes probably. And I'm going to use my Luma and my vector scope here. And so we selected this clip, and now we want to do some color grading on this. So I'm going to come up to my color tools in the top right hand corner here, which says Show Color Inspector. And now by default, Final Cut Pro will use this color board, but I prefer using the color wheel. So I'm going to click on color corrections and then add a color wheel. Now, also you can see that if I scroll down, there's more to this window. So to extend this window across the right hand side of my screen, I'm going to come to the top of the window where it shows me the file name, double click on that, and that extends it to its full height. Now very briefly I'm going to explain what these are in case you're not familiar with the color wheels. You've got your master wheel, which obviously affects everything. You've got your shadows, your highlights, your midtones, so you can affect those individually. And on the right hand side you've got your exposure dial, so that affects the exposure of your clip. And on the left hand side you've got your saturation dial, which affects the saturation. And in the center you've got your color wheel, which affects the hue of your image, and you can change all of that. And most important probably on the bottom right hand side is your reset button on all of these. And so we want to probably bring the tight in line with the wide. We have a look at our Luma, we can see that our brightest point is at around 75. Let's just go back and pull this up to around 75. Yeah, so about there. Now let's have another look at it, compare it. Color's not quite the same. There's a bit of a greenish tinge to the wide. So I'm actually just going to bring up my mids a little bit more as well. Yeah, and then let's pull the highlights on our highlights there. Yep, that's about right. Now you can see here that I like that. You know, the tight's looking pretty good, but the wide, I don't like this green tinge that it's got to it. So I'm just going to select the wide so that we're seeing it in our viewer. And I'm going to add a color correction to this as well. I'm going to add a color wheel, and I want to get rid of a little bit of that greenish tinge to it. So what I'm going to do, it looks like it's mostly in the midtones. So if I just come over to my midtone wheel and then just click on this. Now the key here is less is more. You never want to make extreme changes. So I'm just going to pull it a little bit away from the green. And yeah, I think that's about where I want it. So if we go and look at those are, you know, it's not perfect, but it's pretty darn close. I'm pretty happy with that. So that's a very basic look at some of the color correction tools you have in Final Cut. I'll just jump in just to show you what else there is. I'm not going to show you how to use all of it, but if you wanted to get really fancy, you've got color curves if you're familiar with these from Photoshop, and you've even got hue and saturation curves. So if you wanted to change a particular color, you absolutely can. So just for example, let's say I want to change the hue of his red shirt. He's changed sponsors or they've changed their branding. So if I click the little eyedropper and let's say I click on the yellow there of his shirt, and there we go, we can change the color of that really easily, which is pretty cool. Let's say his sponsor has changed branding. So yeah, but anyway, let's put that back the way it was. So that's a very basic look at some of the color tools you have in Final Cut, because I just thought it's worthwhile knowing what's in there. Now let's have a look at exporting and getting your footage out. So to export your footage, you come over to the top right hand corner of your screen, click on the export button, and you can see here you've got by default master file, Apple devices 720, 1080, 4K, YouTube, Facebook, and if you click on add destination, there's a whole bunch of other destinations you can add. So you can go live streaming, compress if you've got compressors set up on your computer, you can have compressors, Blu-rays, DVDs, emails if your email can handle it. You can save save your current frames if you want to send stills for some reason, image sequence, what have you. But I want to show you another really clever function in Final Cut for media management. So let's say, for example, you don't actually need to do any editing. I'm just going to get rid of that. I'm going to bring up my inspector. Let's say you don't actually need to do any editing of your footage. All you need to do is some basic media management. So what your editor's asked you to do while you're on set, or has asked your DIT to do, is to bring all the footage into Final Cut and just keyword everything and then send it off to them as is. But let's say, for example, you've done leave files in place. So yes, you've got your Final Cut Pro library file. I'm just going to open up a Finder window here. So for example, this library file, so there we go, ACS demo, this library file is only 7.6 gigs, but we've got 1,500, just under 1,600 clips in here, which were quite a few, I think they were 1.19 terabytes. Because if we then go to our external hard drive and look at the showreel folder that we got all this footage from and go Command I to see the info, that's 1 terabyte worth of footage. So we could just send them this folder, but then they've got to take that folder and they've got to reconnect it from the project, and like, it's doable, but it's a pain in the rear end. So a really easy way to do that, to send it all in one go, is to select your library file, come over to the inspector and click on Consolidate. And now what this will do, and what I really love about this in Final Cut, is if you just read it, it explains it really easily in terms of what it's going to do. So it's saying, right, well, I want my media destination to be in my library, so I want everything to go into my library. I want my original files, I want my optimized files, I want my proxy files, everything goes into that library, and it explains here, original, optimized, proxy media will be consolidated to library, media, so on and so forth. The problem with this, because you can see there's a little warning there, is that we don't have enough space on our hard drive to do this. So it will warn you if that's going to happen. So you can actually choose a folder and move it all into a single folder. So you can do that as well. I think this is a good point to explain the difference between optimized and proxy media. Proxy media, as the name would suggest, is proxy media of your existing media. So proxy media is any time that you've created proxies or smaller versions of your media. Optimized media is when you've created those ProRes 422 versions of your media. So for example, if I take this clip here and dump it into my timeline, it's an HDR clip and it's warning me, and yep, that's fine, I don't mind. So that's putting an HDR clip in there, but you see how it's rendering up there at the top. It's got that line, and you'll see the little render bar come up, and you see it's doing that background rendering. And if I click on it, it'll show us there that it's doing the background rendering. This background rendering is creating an optimized ProRes 422 version of this file. So when I say that I want my optimized files included in my consolidation, that includes all of the optimized files that Final Cut has created for all the stuff that you've brought into your timeline. Proxy media is slightly different because proxy media means that you've actually created smaller proxy versions of everything that you're working with so that you can work with them in a smaller situation. The examples of why you might need this is, let's say you're working on a laptop and you don't have enough space to store all your files, so you would create proxy versions. Or alternatively, it might be a case that you're working with, red raw 8K footage and your computer can't quite handle 8K red raw, and so that you create proxies to work with those, and then you only reattach the original media when you get to the color grading part of your project and your workflow. So this Consolidate tool is very, very powerful and very, very useful when it comes to wanting to put everything into your library file if you then want to send that library file to your editor or your producer. And finally, with your storage locations, you can modify that as well. So by default, any new media that's brought into the library will be brought into the library, but I can say that I want it to go to a different folder. Any motion content, so if you've created any motion projects like animations or titles or things specifically for this, by default this goes into your motion templates folder on your computer, but you can add it to the library so that way if you send that library to another editor, they will get all of your motion content as well. So this motion one is super important to be aware of. Your caches, again, by default in your library, and your backups are on your computer, but you can change any of these. So all of these options to adjust and modify your settings in regards to storage and in regards to consolidating, I think are very powerful tools when you're working with Final Cut and you're working with other people. You can see also here, it shows you where all of your content is. So it's showing me that the storage used for media and motion content, so I've got just under 1 terabyte, and that's on my T7 2 terabyte red, but I've got some original content, which is some stuff that I've used myself within here, which is 29 megs, which is being stored on my local hard drive. You could also create another library and just drag in the stuff you've been working with. So let me show you how that works. So if I can say new library, and I'll call this just the timeline, ma'am. And so now I want to take all the clips and only the clips that I've used within this project and send them to someone else. So I've created this new library. I find the project or timeline that I've been working on, and I drag it over to that library. And hey presto, Final Cut pops up and goes, oh, what are you trying to do? What would you like me to do? And it goes, copying the project to the library, just the timeline. So when I copy this across, I want to include the media, the original media, the optimized media, the proxy media, copy media stored in external locations. So if I click on this, it is going to take everything that I've got here on my timeline, and it is then going to copy it into that library. And you can see here that now everything will be stored in that library, but I can modify the settings here and say, no, I want everything to be in that library. And I click OK, and it goes, optimize and proxy media does not exist for some clips, so it's going to create proxy media for it. And I go OK. And let's just go and have a look at what it's doing and while it's doing it. So it's busy transcoding, and it's doing the media management for me. So first it's going to transcode it. So it's going to transcode those few clips, and then it's going to copy them across. So now that that's finished copying, let's go and have a look at the results. And so this is now our backup where we want to copy the new project. And if we have a look at that, it is... Now what's really cool is that it hasn't just taken the bits that we've used in the timeline, it's given us the entire clip. So every single clip that I had in this timeline, even if I've cut it down, the entirety of that clip has gone into this new library, which is now 64 gigs. And I can now confidently send that to another editor just that library file, and I know that everything that I was working on in this timeline is now in this library for the editor to work with. So that was a rather high-level overview of some of the features and functions that I think would be really useful for a cinematographer to use within Final Cut Pro. I hope it was useful. I hope it's helpful to you to improve and speed up your workflow, and even maybe help you be a bit more creative when you do want to get into the edit. And yeah, thank you very much, and I'll catch you next time.